another episode of GovTech Today, where we try to bridge .com with .gov. I'm Jen Saha, I'm your host, and we have an exciting guest on today, Michael Carroll. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about what you're working on?
Sure. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. Michael Carroll, I look after the public sector business here at Commvault. I've been doing this for about 3 years, supporting our government and education customers. Been here for, like I said, for about 3 years and spent the majority of my career prior to that at EMC and then Dell in a similar role, supporting the data protection business for commercial and government accounts. So it's been a great learning focus and a great learning opportunity for me for the last 3 years to be really focused on our government customers. I've learned a lot, got access to a lot of people, and excited to be here with you today.
Well, I love it. I love all the work you guys are doing at Commvault. I think Commvault as a company has shifted a lot over the past few years to be responsive to the market, frankly, and to respond to what government needs today as it relates to everything that you all work on. We talk about that shift pretty much every time we film an episode of GovTech Today, but I would say the biggest shift, the sexiest shift in government lately is AI. So I'm interested in your take on this as a veteran in this industry. What sort of trends do you foresee in government tech as it relates to AI and specifically to data management and security?
Sure. To your first comment there, I think one of the biggest shifts we've seen specifically in data protection and data management. Commvault's been around for 25 years, and our space has been pretty static, and for the last 20 of that, which has really been around just data protection, traditional workloads, and being able to recover and produce data in the event of a fat finger or somebody deleting something. The shift that you're talking about has really been a shift to the market and what we're actually protecting our customers and their information from. And now what we're protecting them from is cyber and ransomware attacks. So our company, along with the entire market, really has had to shift a little bit in our strategy and our solutions and how we go to market to protect from those things, as opposed to a disaster or a flood or, again, somebody, accidentally and innocently deleting something. So that shift has really led to this, revolution of being able to keep a business up and running and not just having some static data that we can pull. And it's been an exciting opportunity for us to learn and grow and to really provide a lot of value to our customers in an area that's super relevant and important to them. Specific to AI, it's a pretty cool topic. It's definitely the topic of the day in most conversations we have. I think as it's most pertinent to our government customers is really in how AI is used by the bad actors to attack us as the defenders of data, I would say. And that's been the biggest shift. As I mentioned earlier, our focus really is on continuous business and being able to recover in the event of an attack and keeping operations up and running. But what we're protecting against is this constant AI-driven, intelligent ecosystem of attack vectors. That's definitely different than it was 3 years ago. You and I were talking earlier. We used to have very targeted attacks. It would take, the bad guys a little bit of time to really figure out who they were targeting and why and different access points. And it was a manual exercise. And I think at this point, unfortunately for all of us, it's much more intelligent, automated, well-funded attack vector that we're really trying to protect against, which makes the volume of attacks more and more, the sophistication of the attacks more and more, and the ability to scale a lot easier, for the bad guys. And it's led to a very difficult challenge for us and our customers.
So, the realization that I'm having is a little bit terrifying. It's not like government using AI that we really need to be worried about. It's everybody else, right? And so, which sounds fine, no problem. Government will pick up AI too. But the problem with government is it just does not move very quickly. And unfortunately, what I'm hearing from you is our enemies do, right?
They do. And not only that, it's the scoreboard's kind of stacked against us as well. because as the defenders, we have all different security systems in place, and the ability to detect and prevent, and antivirus and security software, and we can buy all these different tools, and 999 times out of 100 we can be successful in that endeavor. And then the one time we're not, we lose, they win. It's one of the unfortunately, it's one of the bad games where you can be right, if you'd be in the Hall of Fame in baseball, but unfortunately in our world, if you're wrong once, or if a threat gets through one time, we lose. So it's really stacked against us in terms of um, the resources, the scale, the adoption of technology, and really just how often we have to be right in order to win.
It's really interesting that you say that because it's kind of a theme in government. Like, you never hear about the successful number of things that were stopped, or all the wins, really, for you guys as a company, all the wins, all the breaches that you've prevented, all the hacks that you've prevented. You only hear about like that one, it hit the fan, everything blows up. So I love the deck stacked against you in the Hall of Fame. Like, you'd be in the Hall of Fame, but it's that one strikeout that really is what you're held accountable to. So I mean,
Yeah.
like, what it like as a citizen, that's terrifying. And it's
Yep.
like, my answer, if I could wave a magic wand, would be like, yep, government should use AI too. Let's do it tomorrow. And I know, because I work with you guys, like, that's not always, it's easier said than done, right? Like, there are a ton of hurdles to jump through. There are regulatory structures, there are procurement processes. So, like, what to you right now are the biggest
Yeah.
barriers that are preventing government from like being on a level playing field with the
Sure.
bad guys?
Yeah, I think one of the things is to choose your partners wisely, and I think most government organizations do. Sometimes there's this belief that the more tools and the more different companies we partner with, the more protected we are, and really, it sometimes it can backfire a little bit. The more tools and the more technologies you potentially buy or invest in or try to deploy, sometimes the more threat vectors you actually create and access points in. So, we see a lot of our customers and a lot of government agencies really trying to be selective in who they partner with. So, certainly in general, and that's, Commvault or whoever that may be, that can solve these problems and can solve more problems than one. We've seen a big shift into that realm. The other thing that we've seen a big shift in is really a focus, instead of keeping the bad guys out, what do we do when they're in? Because it's, that everybody says it's not if but when, and it truly is. And that doesn't mean that we can't invest in technology, and we shouldn't do our due diligence to have all security processes in place to make sure that folks don't get in. But it's almost impossible to have full containment and still have operations. I mean, it's the same struggles we have with any type of cloud or SaaS technology. Is the beauty of these things is that they're open to citizens and users, and you want to go on your portals and use your different tools and make life easier, whether that's your home and property or car or whatever it may be. These systems, and pay your taxes, all of these things require the use of cloud and SaaS and open access, but they also introduce threat vectors, right? So what we've seen a lot of customers focus on is, how do we maintain the ability to run business even in the event of a breach or an attack? And that mindset is different than it probably was, even 2, 3, 4 years ago, where most of the focus was on, we've got to keep all the bad guys out. It's just an impossible. We're not as well funded. We're not as well resourced. So, what we've seen a lot of customers invest in are technologies that offer data that's air gapped and protected and that can quickly run. And this is where we do use AI and automation as the good guys, right? Where we can use some of these technologies and tools to be able to spin up environments that we know are clean and get data and applications running as quickly as humanly possible in the event that someone takes down a system or is in our production systems. And that's really been the shift of where we see the market, um, to what would typically take 30 or 60 or 90, and in some cases a year, to rebuild some of these applications. We've got companies like Commvault and some others that can provide technologies to be able to spin up known clean copies and rebuild applications using AI, using automation, using discovery tools that exist in the environment to be able to keep the critical business operations functioning, even when an attack is going on or an attack has happened. And that's really been the big shift in the last couple of years.
So that's a really interesting shift in that it's admitting that government isn't winning this race. Like we're not able to protect against it all, and we do need to have, backup systems, backup environments that we're able to sort of say, yep, we got breached. It happened. We have a problem with our system. We're shifting to this new system.
Yep.
But even that type of change is probably really difficult for government to accept. I mean, we're dealing with a government that, like, from a technology standpoint, is 5 to 10 years behind like the commercial sector in their adoption of some of these emerging technologies, like AI included. So
Yep.
when you go and tell a government, like, you will be infiltrated, it's going to happen. Let us help you prepare for when that happens. What are the reactions from some of them? Are
Yeah.
they like, "Yep, we're okay with that. Here, take all our money." And then, like, also, we're working in a constrained fiscal environment, right? Where we're not exactly like giving a ton of resources and thought to like what happens when we're hacked. It's like, no,
Yep.
no, we just want you to prevent it from happening. So, like, what are
Yeah.
some of the discussions that you're having with
Sure.
government officials?
Yeah. So everything you said is true. I'm slightly more optimistic, and so a lot of the so most of our conversations are met with just complete awareness of the environment. Nobody knows that, the attacks that they face more than the customers that we talk to, particularly when you're talking to the real doers in the environment and the hands-on technical folks. And even from the C-level down, I mean, they know. We'll meet with customers all the time. Will tell us, we literally will have 5 to 10,000 attacks potentially on a daily basis. So I mean, there's, or folks trying to infiltrate. So I think there's an awareness that already exists, and luckily, there's technologies in the market that are really evolving from somewhat of the traditional functionality and features to this new layer of essentially protection and continuous business that are not always cost prohibitive or additive. A lot of times, by just doing consolidation of technology, and it doesn't always cost more. And in some cases, and in a lot of cases, quite honestly, you can replace some legacy systems and tools with newer tools that have these capabilities and save money. I think some of the challenges we run into are, with government and budgeting cycles, is even when something makes sense financially in a certain period of time, it's not always easy to execute against that.
Yeah.
So that's where we try to be as creative as we can. A lot of our technologies, for example, are now SaaS based, so sometimes they can be subscription or annual, and we don't have to. Sometimes that helps from a budgeting standpoint. But I think most of the time, the customers know the landscape that they have. What they don't sometimes know, and what we get to talk about a lot and educate and have really cool conversations about, is the ways to use existing dollars to have new capabilities that will allow you to respond better in those events, right? And a lot of it, again, not to keep hitting a buzzword, but a lot of it is in the use of automation and AI, right? So what used to be, hey, we have a backup, and we'll use our world for an example. Like, we've got to copy this backup, but to take that backup and restore it and then get an application up and running, sometimes that means rebuilding an application, then getting service up and running to the user, is months of a process, and like weeks and months, even in a relatively simple environment. Now, we have a technology, and there's other things, not just in data protection, but other worlds, but we have technologies now that automate those things to known clean environments that can potentially be built in the cloud that don't exist yet, where we'll spin them up and the data is automatically rehydrated. And then we have technologies that will rebuild the application using AI and automation and tools. And we take something that was months to potentially hours or days. And that's real world. How fast can I get this system online? And again, those are things that don't necessarily require massive budgets that don't exist. It's really sometimes a mindset in the technology and how we're approaching the problem, because these technologies exist, and they're constantly evolving and building, which is why I'm maybe a little bit more optimistic, but everything that you said is super accurate. Sometimes the adoption takes some time, the use cases, the complexities for sure. That's a real thing.
I think maybe where, and I love your optimism. I think where I struggle with government is their willingness to invest in preparedness, right? Like it's not an emergency until the website's down or
Yeah.
until someone's not getting paid or until, someone's not getting food stamps at next month's cut of food stamps. So
Yep.
I love your optimism, but
Very
you're
fair.
right. Like, it's not an emergency. It doesn't demand emergency funding. It doesn't demand urgent and emergency procurement processes until it's broken.
Yep.
And what you're telling me is like, it's going to be broken. You guys need to invest in this. So when it is broken, it's only broken for a few seconds instead of a few days or
Yeah.
a few months.
Yep.
And I think that's a tough one. Like, I think
It is.
where there is encouraging news is like cybersecurity is finally getting the dues that they so long have deserved, which is like we need to invest in this. It needs to be a substantial portion of our budget because when there is an emergency, it's always very public
Yep.
and very detrimental to like service delivery to government's clients, which at the end of the day are some of the most needy citizens among us. So
Mm.
that's where I am optimistic is like people are finally realizing, hey, we need to invest in this stuff. Like this is a big deal and it is going to help us prevent or recover more quickly from some of those. Hey, our whole system is down. Like we can't produce a budget. This is a problem,
Yep.
right?
Totally. I'd say, even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, our team very rarely was having conversations with security organizations. Now I would say almost every significant deal or opportunity or project that we work on, we're talking to the security team in conjunction with the traditional, IT or infrastructure team, which is a big shift. But there are some organizations where those teams aren't necessarily working as closely together. And unfortunately,
No, you're kidding, right? Like government being siloed?
I'm a
Is that
resident of California and the state's a great customer, so I haven't seen any of this around here. But in some other places, I'd say that this happens. And unfortunately, there's a major human element of this because we can put as much technology as we want in place as customers and as providers, but if there's not a human element of the planning process, of the integration, of the response, and it all kind of just falls apart, particularly in how you're going to go build these systems from the ground up to with an end goal in mind of having continuous operations both on prem and in the cloud. And particularly the more workloads we see moving to the cloud and the bigger you know cloud adoption, we see this even more so where these teams really have to talk and communicate, um, or there's not enough technology that can solve that. Right? Really, there is a human element in government in all of our accounts that's super critical.
So let's talk a little bit about that because I've long been an advocate. I think like every organization's weakest point is their employees. It only takes one person to click on that phishing email to open up, an entire organization to an attack. And I mean, what are you seeing when it comes to these sort of phishing emails,
Yeah.
sophistication on them, just volume of them, especially now that we have AI, which you referenced earlier, just like explodes capacity on the part of some
Yeah.
of these bad actors.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think like we were talking about earlier, there's a due diligence around education of employees and users and what to look for and how to handle these phishing attacks. But the reality is, particularly in the state like we are, there are so many users that it is almost impossible to educate and prevent these phishing attacks. And they're so much more sophisticated and intelligent now. I got a personal one about something that I'm working on, and like even this looks really good, and I opened the first thing, and then I had to check the site. I mean, and I live and breathe in this space. It's so difficult to prevent all of those things, going back to our earlier conversation, we have to make the assumption that there are things getting through the cracks, and it's really how we respond there. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't have tools and technology and processes in place to prevent as much as we can. We can't just open the gates completely and say, "Hey, come on in. We'll defend against you." But it's so difficult to prevent, especially at the scale of government and users and employees. It's a really, really difficult problem.
Yeah, I agree.
If,
And like,
if you want me to scare you even more, there's another element of it that's particularly in government with people of influence and power and public figures. There's almost like a mafia human element of this thing too, where the bad actors will target people with really serious threats, and your family, I mean, so just the amount of attacks, particularly with the more public and important and powerful some of these our politicians are, it's really scary. So the idea that you can just prevent everything, there's a human element of it that's, and not to go too dark, but when I know what school your kids go to, like there's no technology or phishing emails that are going to stop those types of
right.
scenarios. So it's definitely a scary world. Luckily, I think most technology providers and partners and our customers and agencies are doing their best to keep up with the tech. It's really it comes down to the process and the planning and the human element that's really critical.
I like that idea. And I guess my encouragement to the policymakers and our state .gov listeners would be to just invest in that planning, because
Yeah.
you're right, it's going to happen. I will say, like, of the, and we hear about them because we work in this industry. They don't, luckily, make like front page of the paper, but like the breaches that have happened in, especially in California government over the past year, I think the majority of them were really like someone clicked something that they shouldn't have clicked,
Yeah.
and then a system's down. And it's that planning part of it where it's like, oh, the department hasn't been doing backups. Like they've just been
Yeah.
skipping backups for the last 6 months, or,
Yep.
it's the human elements that are letting the bad actors in, but also the human elements in lack of planning, lack of foresight, lack of investment in the exact tools that you're talking about, that I think really open them up
Yep.
to having it become a public issue or having it end up on the front page of the paper, which I can tell you, from like, I've been there, from every government employee, that is like rule number one. What do you want to avoid? You want to avoid making the news. Like,
For sure.
never good news. It's never good news. It's not we prevented all these attacks. It's we let this one slip through the cracks, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's really about planning. And I think what we get to talk to a lot of customers about and educate and have great dialogues on is like, what are we planning for? And I think that's what's really shifted. And we'll ask a lot of our customers and prospects and folks we're talking to in different events or panels or wherever it may be, what's your plan for cyber, like cyber attack? What's your cyber recovery plan, CR plan? And very often what we get in response is basically a dusted off copy of what a disaster recovery plan is. And the education and the conversations are really interesting there because what you're solving for is drastically different. And so many cases, there really is no plan. And that's where I go back to, it's not necessarily a major overhaul of all new technology and massive spending. It's really, what are we preventing against? And less likely are we preventing against a flood. And we've got bomb cyclones coming in, and
Yeah.
knock on wood, hopefully we don't have those scenarios now. But like, the more often than not, we're protecting from a ransom and a cyber attack, and that's a really different scenario. Just at the level of, hey, you're not failing over from one data center to another because there's a flood or a power outage in the data center. In a cyber attack, you're not doing that because the data that you're failing over to is corrupted and the bad guys are in it. So it doesn't matter what data center you're in, it's the access point. So often we hear customers talk about, well, hey, we'll fail over here or we'll do that. And it just doesn't work in these circumstances. So again, it's really a mindset shift of what is the problem that we're solving for, and how do we use or upgrade technology that we already have. Maybe it's a different provider, a different vendor, or a different location, and maybe instead of on-prem, it's in the cloud or whatever it is. How do we take the existing resources, the existing technology, sometimes the technology debt, and roll that into a technology or solution that prevents or that solves for the problem that we actually have at hand now, which is not 5 years ago's problem. And that's right. I'm 100% in alignment with you, where sometimes the adoption in government technology is 5 years behind, and it's really a mentality. The tech exists to help. We've got to go have really good conversations about what we're investing in and how we're deploying it. I think
Gosh,
that'll make
yeah,
a huge
I love
difference.
that. And I hadn't even really thought about like disaster recovery. It's the same way like a normal insurance doesn't protect against cyber, and you have to have cyber insurance. Well, a normal disaster recovery doesn't protect against a cyber disaster. Like
Totally.
you have to have a special plan for that. And I
Yep.
imagine those plans have to be really dynamic because the environment and the industry is changing so
Yep.
quickly, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting space for sure. It's exciting. There's a lot of great opportunity. Um, so we have a lot of great conversations. It's fun.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Michael. This has been super fun and a little terrifying, but more enlightening on the opportunity that this all sort of presents us with in the government. So, really appreciate your time today, and have a good rainy rest of the day. Avoid that
Yeah,
bomb cyclone.
I'm in SoCal, so things are great here. But
Yep,
I appreciate it. It's great
it's a
chat.
wet one. It's a wet one up here in Sacramento, but yeah, hang in there.
All right. Thank you.